you and I have been talking about, sort of like, the perception that the economy is changing, at a civilian level. Regular people are now having conversations about the economy. Not to say that we're special people. I mean, if there was a special person on this podcast, it would not be this guy. It would be that guy over there.
I don't know what you're talking about, Chris.
But the bottom line is
special to me.
The bottom line is there is a tremendous upswing I've seen in online punditry by regular folks that are grabbing on to charts, or they're grabbing on to graphics, or they're grabbing on to, little snippets of information. And I mean not to mock them at all. That's not my interest. And that's not what I'm trying to do here. They're trying to make sense of what's going on in the economy, and we welcome that. I mean, in fact, this show was created for that reason, because we feel like there is a huge gap between understanding or thinking and knowing, right? So I wanted to ask you this question. If you could break it down into 2 or 3 repeatable things that people have an interest in understanding the economy could do, that you do as part of your professional approach, what would they be?
Well, look, that's a very difficult question. I mean, it's the economy is not. I mean, it's not that easy to understand it. The first thing I would tell people, and by the way, I did a panel on this recently, is stop looking at a single data point to come up with the full picture.
Okay.
Right.
Well, that's good advice. That was not a difficult answer for you to conjure. That was a great.
I think that's the first thing I tell people all the time, is just stop looking at a single data point to understand the full picture. In the first quarter, we had a negative GDP print, and I think we read all kinds of comments about that negative GDP print, including some people said we're in a recession. Well, we're not in a recession. Some people said, it's the tariffs. And I would actually agree that it was the tariffs, but some people didn't quite understand why it was the tariffs, right? And all kinds of, they didn't understand the mechanism, necessarily. And so I say, just stop looking at a single data point. The second thing is try to look at multiple, sources, right? If you believe the economy is not just the GDP number, and if you believe that, because it's not, right? But if you believe that GDP is, approximates output, real output in the economy, then you should pay attention to investment, and you should pay attention to consumer spending. You should also pay attention to the employment picture, right? Output is also essentially the combination of employment, population, employment, productivity, right? All of those things matter for whether you see a big increase in output or not. If you have a shrinking population, or if you have falling employment, right, then chances are output is going to fall, right? And so when people say, hey, we're in a recession, I say, look at the employment numbers. Well, employment's still increasing. So maybe we're not quite in a recession, right? Look at productivity growth. There's measures of productivity growth. You can look at that, and you can tell me whether or not you think that's moving higher or lower. And so I would challenge people to look at more than just one data point, one statistic, or even one source of data. Right. In the first quarter, we had comments. People say, well, look at GDP now. The Atlanta Fed GDP now is really, really high. Ooh, 4-point-something%. Right. So I would say just, pay attention to all those things. And ultimately, the whole story in the first quarter was, if I go ahead and import a bunch of stuff, right, that ahead of the tariffs, right, then, you're going to have, a situation where, your net exports in GDP will reflect the surge in imports. If you're done importing a bunch of stuff because you're like, well, I stored up 6 months worth of stuff. And now, I'm going to pull back now. I got enough stuff, enough inventory to last me the next 6 months. Well, that's actually going to show up in net exports as well in GDP the following quarter. And so, you may end up with a number that doesn't look that great and then a number that looks amazing the quarter after, right? And so, just looking at GDP doesn't mean anything is really ultimately the point. I think you got to pay attention to the labor market. And we've done a whole podcast on the labor market. The labor market, top line numbers look good. And so if you just look at the employment figure, employment gains, you're saying, hey, we're expanding rapidly. But if you look inside the numbers and look at the details, you learn, for example, that half of the sectors have actually cut employment in the last jobs report, right? And again, that's just one jobs report.
Right.
You'll have to look to see whether or not the next jobs report reflects a similar picture, a similar story, and where the trend is headed, right? And so that's my advice. Look at the trend. Look at different sources of data. Look at different measures of economic performance. And if you do that successfully, then you can come up with a realistic picture of what's really going on in the economy.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate your sincerity in those thoughts, and thank you for sharing them. That's I think that's a great stopping point, but a great starting point for people that are out there that maybe would like to just get a little bit deeper into their understanding of economics and how to do so. So thanks, O.